You know, there's been a joke going around the internet since the COVID-19 crisis started saying, my car used to get 8 miles to the gallon, but now it's getting 8 weeks to the gallon. And of course, in every bit of humor, there's a little bit of truth. Certainly, driving habits in California, all over the country, all over the world, have changed. And a lot of people have questions about what that means for their insurance. So we decided to bring in an industry leader. So please welcome my guest, Joe Volponi, President and CEO of the California-based California Casualty. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. It's nice to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you and discuss the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the industry.
Thanks very much. Stating the obvious, there has never been anything like COVID-19, but there have been other crises and other even pandemics. What is the closest that you have come to as an insurance industry leader dealing with something like this?
Well, you're right. Over the course of the last 100 years or so, there have been a number of significant world events that have impacted the insurance industry in a variety of ways. If you think of World War I, or the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, or the Great Depression, or World War II, all of those had an impact on the insurance industry. But more recently, there have been a couple of other events that are significant, world events that have directly impacted, driving behaviors and subsequent accident rates. And most of those have to do with, changes in oil production in the Mideast that affect gas prices in this country and shift driving patterns. But, for example, the Arab oil embargo in 1973 certainly had that impact, as did the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and again with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, very similar impacts. But more recently, the financial crisis in 2008 that had a big spike in unemployment, had a prolonged impact on driving activity and subsequent accident rates. And certainly in the COVID-19 crisis that we're going through right now, there's no question that accidents have dropped in the short run, but how long those will last and the impact, the ultimate impact, is really unknown. If there's a prolonged, period where people are afraid to get on airplanes or reluctant to take public transportation, we could see an actual increase in driving activity.
It's interesting. I've been seeing all these TV ads about driving patterns and whatnot from some of the big players. But if I'm not mistaken, California Casualty has a very specific niche. You work with what has been called recently our first responders, a lot of people who are out there now helping the rest of us through COVID-19. How is your client base unique or different from some of the others, and how does that impact what you do?
Yeah, that's right, David. We've been insuring our customers, for over 100 years prior to World War I, and our customer base is largely made up of the first responders that you're talking about: firefighters, police officers, highway patrol officers, nurses, doctors, paramedics, and educators. In other words, the American heroes that are on the front lines in the battle against the COVID-19 crisis. And these are people that don't have the luxury of sheltering in place. They're driving to work every single day to provide the essential services, that all of our communities rely on.
Yeah, and I've been watching these ads, some of them very clever. I've been in the public relations business for 30 some years, and I know how companies respond to a crisis. The first couple of minutes or the first couple of weeks, everyone is still in the same mode they were before the crisis. And then advertising starts to address the crisis, to show sympathy. And I've been seeing some insurance companies seem to be rushing to give a partial premium refunds because of what they say is reduced driving shelter in place. What is your position on that?
Well, I think it's important to understand why people buy insurance in the first place. The main reason that people buy insurance is so that they have financial protection for their most valuable assets. and the peace of mind that goes with that protection. So I think above all else, it's utterly essential that insurance companies build that financial strength, that they're there when their customers need them to pay their claims and help put their lives back together following what's undoubtedly a very traumatic event. And building that kind of financial strength requires a long-term view. There's lots of ups and downs in the insurance industry, and you can't afford to overreact to any of it. I think the refunds that you were talking about are nice. They garner a lot of headlines and they make a flashy marketing impact, but ultimately it's possible that they could be not in the insured's long-term best interest.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Why do you feel it's so important, not only for drivers and car owners and people who are using the cars, especially now, like first responders, but so important for insurance companies to take the long-term view versus the short-term view?
Auto insurance is unlike almost any other product out there in that the price has to be set before you know the cost of goods sold. In other words, the losses, which is the primary cost, don't occur till long after a price is established and the policy is written. So that price that's charged is based on an estimate of the number of accidents that are going to occur in a given period and the average cost uh, of each of those accidents, and it's based on historical data. But with a business as volatile as insurance, where any number of things, natural disasters and the like, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, can cause the actual losses in a given year to be wildly different than the initial estimate based on historical data. And that's why it's essential that you take the long-term view, because you don't know when or if these catastrophes are going to happen in a given year. But what you do know with absolute certainty is that if they do, the insurance company is not going to go back and collect additional premium to pay for those losses. So that's what makes the long-term view, so important. In the current crisis, there's no question that there's been a short-term drop in the number of accidents, but how long that will last, is an unknown. And there are many forces that operate in the opposite direction. For example, with fewer cars on the road, people are driving faster than ever, which results in accidents that are far more severe because they happen at higher rates of speed. Medical costs are going to continue to grow and possibly grow at an accelerated rate when all the people that have recurring medical conditions that weren't getting treatment during this period when everyone was focused on the coronavirus are going to be competing for scarce medical resources with people that are injured in automobile accidents. And of course, law firms are going through a tough time right now, and they're going to they're going to be looking to raise their prices to recoup what they've lost during this period. A lot of the factories that make auto replacement parts have been retooled to make ventilators and masks during this period. So the ultimate cost and availability of auto parts is an unknown. Rental car companies are going to have to sterilize each individual car before they send it back out on the road, which will add cost, to the system. And then finally, with forestry not being considered an essential business, no one's clearing the dead trees and dried brush like they normally would, which could result in a very catastrophic fire season, later in the year. So I think it's absolutely critical for insurance companies to take the long-term view of building that financial strength. While given these, refunds in the short run can have, a big marketing impact and, garner a lot of headlines, it makes no sense to me to, give a refund today, a small refund, and turn around 6 months from now and raise a person's prices if it ultimately turns out that the impact of this crisis didn't change driving habits in the long run.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought you just said that the COVID-19 virus, because of driving patterns, could have an impact on forest fires. It's just the ripple effects of this are really quite amazing. I have just time for one more question. There's some people that have been talking about 12-month policies versus 6-month policies, and you just made the point that a company that does a 6-month policy can raise your rate after 6 months. There's so much information out there, and people, including me, are trying to make decisions about what is best for us. What advice would you give to the California driver calling their insurance company now for advice? Any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said before, I think the most important thing for anyone to ask their insurance company, is whether they're going to have the financial strength, to pay their claims, down the road if things actually, if there's some unexpected event that happens in the second half of the year that dramatically changes driving, patterns, and given that people are going through, a tough time right now, a small refund doesn't necessarily change that. So I'd ask if there are things that the insurance company is doing in the short run to help them, get back on their feet. Things like waiving a deductible or a portion of a deductible if you're unfortunate enough to have an accident during this period, or actually deferring, payment of premium for a couple of months, deferring 100% of that premium for a couple of months to help them get over the hump. And then the people that are driving fewer miles right now, adjusting their mileage rating factors so that they get a lower premium and allows them to get back on their feet while they still have the coverage in place that they need. That's why we at California Casualty try to tailor, specific personalized solutions for each of our customers.
Great, thank you, Joe. And it's nice to know that there's a company based right here in Northern California that is, well, helping, as you like to call it, America's heroes, all of our first responders in the fight against COVID-19. So thanks very much, Joe. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, David.
So now we've learned a little bit more about insurance. Next up, we're going to talk to Jen. Jen, what do you got for us next?